Hey, and welcome back to Bring It In with Morgan Campbell. I'm your host, Morgan Campbell, checking in with your first official episode of the new year. We're also going to talk about the likelihood of actually having the 2020 Olympics this summer in 2021 in Japan, and coaching trajectories and who gets promoted, who gets hired, and who doesn't in the NBA, the WNBA, and the NFL. And we're going to do all that once we bring it in with our all-star panel. Right in front of me, looking very Canadian 2 days out from Inauguration Day in Washington, D.C., where she's going to stay below the window line lest these fools start shooting. Meghan McPeak.
How's it going, everybody?
Also in Washington, D.C., he made it this morning, which is a big accomplishment. We were worried for a second, but we knew he wasn't going to let us down. Dave Zirin, how we doing?
Oh, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Right, perfect. So listen, Dave, I'm going to start with you because amongst the three of us, you've been to Japan.
Yep.
And you've talked about the Olympics with people who live there, because in the last couple of weeks, we've heard all of these different things about whether or not the Olympics can or should take place this summer. You had the president of Japan saying that they must take place. There's no other option. But you've also had this poll of Japanese residents, and 80% of people polled saying this 2020 Olympics, already pushed to 2021, should either be canceled or postponed again. And then you have former IOC members saying, you know who needs to settle this? The United Nations. It's a lot to digest. But Dave, you spent some time in Japan talking to people about how they really feel about the Olympic Games. So now what is your read on this situation and what you think is going to happen?
Well, first and foremost, I was there in 2019 when, for all we knew, Corona was just a beer with some lime. And when we were there, when I was there with my translator, with a co-writing partner I was working with, a guy named Jules Boykoff, what we saw was that people were not that thrilled about the Olympics then, before any of what was going on right now. And that's something worth keeping in mind. See, when the Olympics come to big, thriving areas like Tokyo, they bring with them a lot of debt, displacement, and the militarization of public space. And we saw all of that on display as early as 2019. I mean, in 1964, Tokyo hosted the Olympics, and a lot of people were displaced for those games. And we met people in 2019 who they were obviously in their 70s and 80s. They had been displaced in 1964, and then they were displaced again for the 2020 games. So displaced twice in their lives for the Olympics. And we interviewed them and spoke to them. And I mean, for them, the Olympics are a harrowing childhood experience and now a harrowing experience for them as adults. So there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of distress, and a lot of unhappiness about the coming games. And so I wasn't surprised at all to see that 80% figure, because already in Tokyo, I mean, there were demonstrations in the streets. I mean, there were people who were just not happy with how the Olympics were being organized.
Okay, Dave, and before we go to you, Meghan, I want to follow up with you, Dave, for a second, because you said something about the Olympics bringing debt. Now, as Canadians, I'm not old enough to remember this because it happened a few months before I was born, but the Montreal Olympics ran up a huge debt, and the city of Montreal was paying for that for years.
30 years.
So, right. And so a couple of Olympic cycles later, you had the boycotted games in Moscow that Canada and the US and a lot of other countries didn't attend. But heading into the Los Angeles Olympics in 1984, those organizers said, well, we're not finishing with any debt. We're going to make this Olympics very corporate. We're going to solicit sponsorship. We're going to make money because these sponsors are going to pay for this Olympics so that the city doesn't have to. So now how are we back in a situation now? They've laid out the formula of making this thing as commercial as possible and squeezing every stream of revenue until it's dry. Yeah. So how are we still in a situation where cities are taking on debt to pay for Olympic Games?
Yeah, in 1984, they thought they had the secret sauce for not having debt for Olympic Games, and that was corporate underwriting. The problem was this thing happened. A lot of people think what happened that messed that all up was 9/11, but actually it was 1996 with the bombing in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. That was the first time that they said, okay, we actually need this to be a security operation, unlike anything that sports or entertainment has ever seen before. And then 9/11 took that and put it on steroids and turned it into the sort of thing where you effectively have to have, frankly, what the inauguration is looking like right now in Washington, D.C., in order to have the Olympic Games. And the cost of that is put on the cities themselves, much more than it's put on the IOC, the Olympics. I mean, that kind of debt is a state debt that they take on in order to host the Olympics. And so that's how we've gotten to this point. In Tokyo, which is, by the way, an amazing city, but also a place that is not used to this hyper militarization of public space. I mean, that's where not only where all the cost was coming from, but also a lot of the disinterest and even anger at the Olympic Games.
Right. Okay. So then we have all of these factors kind of mitigating against the Olympics, and you overlay this pandemic on top of that. Now we have Dick Pound saying athletes should maybe go to the front of the line for vaccine, and you have Gabriella Dubois-Stafford, Canadian middle distance runner, saying, "Well, I don't want to skip the line. Like, I want society." A broader cross section of society to be safe before you prioritize me. But Meghan, like, what are the implications, especially for a sport like basketball, where we expect people who are already famous, mainstream stars, to go over there and play? Like, what are the implications of canceling these games or delaying it one more time, or forcing NBA players or trying to coerce NBA players to spend their summer in Tokyo?
Well, I think with the fact that it's already been postponed once, and now with the pandemic also slowing down the NBA season specifically in the timing, it now runs basically into when you would have the national team training camps and some qualifiers. For example, the Canadian men's national team still has to qualify. And if I'm not mistaken, their qualifier, they'll be playing in Victoria. So they may now have to figure out, you even have to throw in the head coach, Nick Nurse, who could be in the NBA playoffs while they're supposed to also be trying to qualify for the 2020 Olympics. So I think if it gets postponed, some athletes, specifically on the basketball side, may take a sigh of relief because of the timing of the NBA season. They don't have to worry about trying to play in the playoffs, play in the finals potentially, and then maybe have a week off and then roll into the Olympics. The WNBA players, they always have the Summer Olympics tying up with their season. So they always have a 5 to 6 week break that the league gives them off, because 99% of the league plays for a national team. So they're primarily their national team players as well too. So I think if it gets postponed again, which I don't think it will get, I personally don't think, if you can't do it this summer, it should just, like, let's move on for 2024. Let's not try to do them too close together, because then you have 2020 and 2024 being, anywhere from a year and a half to 2 years potentially apart. And now you're adding on to already aging athletes who have played an entire season, dealing with a pandemic, trying to take care of their family. So I think it's just more on the body. And I think that then puts the risk factor in that you see players deciding not to play for their national teams. And I think that's going to be a big thing, especially for the European countries. When you think of, Spain, they're really a strong team in the men's side. You think of Australia on the women's side. You may have players decide not to play, and then that is a factor in the star factor of the Olympics.
Okay, we're gonna stick a pin in that. We're gonna come back to that discussion a little bit later in the year, because I am 100% in support of any basketball player that says I'm skipping the Olympics. We're not going to have that discussion today, only because we got so much to pack in, but we're going to have that discussion. But Dave and Meghan, one thing I am old enough to remember is Winter and Summer Olympics in the same year. Meghan, you might not be old enough to remember that, but I remember 84 Sarajevo and Los Angeles, 88 Calgary and Seoul. So I personally am not opposed in theory to bumping the Summer Olympics back one more year. So you have what we used to have when I was growing up: a Winter Olympics in February, a Summer Olympics in July. But Dave, why is that a less tenable setup in this situation?
I don't know why it would be. I mean, the whole reason why it changed was obviously for money-making reasons, in order to brand the Olympics on an every other year basis. It's like John Carlos, the 1968 Olympian, he once said to me, the reason why they only have them every 2 years now is because they decided it takes 2 years to count all the money. So, you set it up like that every 2 years, you get to maximize the profit potential, which is what the Olympics have really become in the post 1976 Montreal era.
Meghan, you just had a conversation over the weekend with Amber Nichols, who is, I think, the second woman to become a general manager of an NBA G League team. Now, how important is that move in the context of what the NBA and the WNBA are trying to accomplish, especially on the social justice front this year?
Yeah, I think with regards to what it means is it's showing that the NBA, the NBA G League, and the WNBA continue to be three of the most progressive leagues when it comes to sports. You have another appointment of a woman in a predominant position in a franchise. And not only is she the second female, as you mentioned, but she joins Tori Miller, who's with the College Park Skyhawks, which is the affiliate for the Atlanta Hawks, as the only two Black women that are running a franchise as general managers. So there's, a double historic factor there when you think about it. And when you look at what it means is we're in 2021, and with everything that's been going on with women being placed in prominent positions across the sports world, you think of baseball, football, with coaching, you now have a woman running a franchise during a pandemic. So, that was one of the things I asked her was, how do you now, going into your first season, you're doing it in one of the most unprecedented times. And it's so interesting to see how they're going to figure this out. She is actually in Florida now, as we're talking, preparing for the NBA G League bubble, which will take place in Orlando, similar to what we saw on the same campus that the NBA did for their return to play. So I think when you look at what sports is doing, this is another step forward for women in sports, not just on the media side, not just on the coaching side, but now you're doing it in the front office side, and you're pushing more and more women to prominent positions, and it's in a men's sport. When you look at it the way they do it in the WNBA, it's almost accepted, and in society it's cool because, well, it's women's sport, so women working in prominent positions are acceptable. But now you have a men's sport that is continuing to lift women's voices and continuing to put them in prominent positions, and showing just because it's a men's sport does not mean that women can't do this job. At the end of the day, all players in the NBA have always said, especially when they talk about a Kara Lawson, a Becky Hammon, basketball is basketball. If you know the game, you know the game. It's the same in the front office. If you know how to scout talent, you know how to pick out those gems, those diamonds in the rough, then you can do the job, whether you are male or female, Black or white, or whatever your, creed and ethnicity are. It does not matter how you are, what you look like, or who you are. As long as you know the game and can break it down, you're going to be able to do the job. And that's where Amber is in this position.
Okay, so Meghan, let me follow up with you real quick, because the thing that interests me, and this is not something we know now, but it's something we might figure out in a few years. And because when I look at moves like this, I also try to imagine what's going to happen in a few years. And what I'm interested to see, and you being an NBA, WNBA, G League person, have a better idea and a better understanding of the infrastructure of these leagues than I do. But to what extent are these G League jobs an actual pathway to similar jobs in the NBA? And to what extent are they kind of glass ceiling jobs where you can kind of get yourself branded as a G League coach and can never shake that label? Like, does Amber Nichols have a chance to take what she's doing in the G League and translate it to the NBA level?
Nick Nurse is a perfect example of that. He was one of the best coaches in the NBA G League. He won an NBA G League title. He turned that into coaching overseas as well, too. He's obviously now the head coach of the men's national team in Canada, and he won an NBA title with the Toronto Raptors. That's a perfect example of taking your experience from the G League, utilizing it, continue to build your brand, build your knowledge, build your experience, and taking advantage of an opportunity when it's presented to you. I think the same thing can happen from a front office standpoint as well, too, from coaching, and even in my situation, from the media and broadcasting side of things. The G League is set up so that it can be, in a way, a farm system, similar to what hockey has with their farm system for players. You can also utilize it from a front office standpoint, coaching standpoint, and, PR or media or broadcasting standpoint. You're getting experience firsthand, working in these situations, putting together a roster, getting players on contract, negotiating with agents. You can utilize that experience. And then when an opportunity comes available with your parent franchise, and obviously there's some franchises in the NBA that don't have a direct affiliate to them, you can utilize that and get it with another another NBA team, and then build your brand, build your experience, and rise the ranks of the ladder of getting to the front office to where you want to go. I know Shelby Weaver, who's with the Toronto Raptors, has said she wants to be a GM in the NBA. Amber Nichols has said the same. Tori Miller has said the same. Most head coaches in the G League, as well as assistant coaches, they want to be on an NBA bench. Nathaniel Mitchell, who's with the Charlotte Hornets right now, was with the 905 and as well to the Maine Red Claws, which is the affiliate for the Boston Celtics. He also utilized his experience to get to the NBA. So the G League, as though it's a developmental league and building players, it also builds the front offices and every personnel that is in these organizations.
Right. So what you're saying is that the G League, this relationship between the G League and a lot of NBA teams, especially with the Raptors specifically, is working as it should, as it's designed. And to the extent that they can, they've created like this meritocracy where you can follow like a pretty traditional path to the big job where you work your way up. Dave, we don't often see the same thing happening in the NFL. Dave, how is it that I could be the offensive coordinator, the guy in charge of the brains behind the most potent offense in the NFL for the last few years, Eric Bieniemy, and still not get a sniff of a head coaching job? How does that happen?
Racism. You see, in the NFL, they have, as people might know, this thing called the Rooney Rule, which kind of gives the game away a little bit. The Rooney Rule has been around for about 15, 17 years or so. And it's designed in a way to make sure that African-American and all coaches of color are able to get an opportunity to coach, to have interviews to coach at the NFL level. And I think it gives the game away because what it dictates is that you actually have to sit across a table with a black or brown coach and just have a conversation with them about the job. And that's not what was happening in the NFL. And so now it happens, but unfortunately, there's been no change in the ranks of ownership, really, although maybe some sons and daughters picking it up, a couple of sales here and there, but the mentality of franchise ownership hasn't changed. And so you still have a lot of interviews with candidates who don't really get a chance. And then you have people who really should be getting a chance, like Eric Bieniemy, who's more than proven himself across the board, and who can't get hired. There's no rational explanation for it. I mean, how do we understand that the Detroit Lions, the woebegone Detroit Lions, would sooner hire the tight ends coach of the New Orleans Saints than hire the offensive coordinator of the most high-powered franchise that we've seen in a generation? I mean, there's only one way it makes sense, and it makes sense in that you still have this tired mentality at the top end of NFL franchises. That's, it's even wrong to call it conservative as much as to just call it for what it is, which is a racist country club attitude, that they want the kinds of coaches that, that they feel comfortable with, that they feel like, I'm going to use an NBA thing, but like it was said that the owner of the Golden State Warriors liked Steve Kerr more than Mark Jackson because he said he wanted somebody he could play golf with. And it's this, it's this kind of code that you hear, and it doesn't take, Al Sharpton to figure out what it means. And so the people who pay the price for that, though, are the Eric Bieniemys of this world, people who deserve that opportunity but aren't getting them. That's a problem that the NFL has. And what they need to do is they need to figure out ways to disincentivize racism. It's not enough just to say you have to sit across the table from somebody. They need to find other, and they are trying to figure out, that's how bad it is that they are trying to figure out other ways and other methods to open up these coaching opportunities, like saying, well, maybe we'll, can reward teams with draft picks if they hire a black coach. But a lot of black coaches says, well, we don't want that because that actually is a very bad look. So then it says, well, maybe we'll reward a team if they're actually able to develop like a farm-like system inside their coaching tree to be able to get more opportunities. That, I think, has gotten a lot more favorability. But I think they need to figure something out because, I mean, what does it say that they do all these commercials now during the playoffs about social justice, and they show Black Lives Matter, and, they're embracing this branding so strongly. You see it during the playoff games, and yet Eric Bieniemy can't get a job.
It is amazing. The few things that stand out to me about the Eric Bieniemy case are, one, like, what are his options now? Philadelphia, where the last coach we're pretty sure was actively sabotaging his team so they would lose, so they would get a higher draft pick. And Houston, where this generationally talented quarterback, a guy who finished at or near the top of the league in passing the season after they traded away his number one receiver, is openly feuding with upper management. And now Eric Bieniemy has a chance to parachute into that relationship. Like, it doesn't seem to me that any way it shakes out now that he's being rewarded for the success he's had. Two, you could always say, and like, if you're the contrarian, these are the two contrarian arguments. One, well, of course, he's the most successful offensive coordinator because he has Patrick Mahomes and he has Kelsey and he has Tyreek Hill and he has now, when he's healthy, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, which, okay, so he has great players. A collection of great players does not make a great offense. And that didn't stop the defensive coordinator from the Rams, whose name I forget. He just got a head coaching gig. And I can make the same argument for him. Well, why is he the best defensive coach? Because he has Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey. Like, you could always make a contrarian argument that always winds up with you hiring the same type of person. And then the other contrarian argument is, well, maybe he's not that good of an interviewer. To which I say, job interviews are almost useless. Job interviews basically give the decision maker a chance to affirm the decision he or she has already made. Because if I'm looking at Eric Bieniemy's track record of yards, passing yards, rushing yards, points on board, points on the scoreboard, and statistics like across the offense, it's not like Kelsey is making all these yards at Tyreek Hill's expense. Like, they find a way to share the football, share the points, share the yardage. What is an hour-long conversation going to do? What's that going to tell me differently? And why do I need to explain to you my philosophies on getting the ball down the field when every team has a staff of people that they sit around and pay for 40, 60, 80 hours a week just to sit around and watch your film and break it down? People know what Eric Bieniemy does, but they just can't do what he does. And the only way to get someone to do what he does is to hire him. Yet we find some way to always bring it back to square one. So Meghan, my question to you is, what can NFL, Dave, we'll come back in a second. Meghan, what can NFL decision makers learn from the NBA and the G League about broadening and deepening the talent pool?
I mean, to Dave's point, stop being so racist.
A simple lesson, right?
Like it seems so simple, but and it's like I'm thinking back to last night, and I wasn't necessarily watching the game, but I was following along on Twitter because I was watching Abby Phillips and Kamala Harris's feature on CNN. So I was paying attention to that. But I opened Twitter, and all of a sudden there's a stream of people talking about a hire literally seconds after the clock went to zero with the Buccaneers and the Saints, with one of the coaches from New Orleans getting a job. How are you, like, when were you interviewing that you got a job after you just lost? So like, that to me says that the teams and the decision makers, they have their person in mind of who they want before they even open up the interview process. So if that's the case, why are you even opening up the interview process?
And you know what's funny? Because any good quarterback coach asks his quarterback when you're watching film, hey, what do you see pre-snap? What is the defense showing you? And that will give you some ideas about where you want to go with the ball. But at the same time, you have to understand, if the other team is disguising a coverage, you have to go to your secondary read. And what these teams are showing us is that they are not prepared to do this, the very thing they tell their quarterbacks to do. Listen, I'm throwing to Deshaun Hopkins. I don't care if he's double covered, triple covered, quadruple covered, whatever. And that might work with Deshaun Hopkins. It's not going to work if you're hiring somebody else over Eric Bieniemy. Dave, you're going to say something.
Well, only that there's so much revisionist history about Patrick Mahomes. I mean, you go back and look at the draft reports. There were a ton of so-called experts who said this is going to be the bust pick of the draft. Somebody with a big arm, but no talent to be an NFL quarterback. He was not a winner. He couldn't win in college. I mean, all kinds of stuff was said about Patrick Mahomes. And so if you take that at face value, you have to think one of two things. Either all these so-called experts are just a bunch of media talking heads who get huge inflated salaries to make predictions of things that never come true. And that couldn't be true. That could never be true.
Never.
So the other conclusion you have to draw is that Eric Bieniemy took this young man and turned him into the $500 million quarterback that he is today. And so it's one of those things too, where it's like, let's give Eric Bieniemy some flowers for the fact that Patrick Mahomes is so good, that he is able to get the ball to Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill, two people whose personalities are a tad volatile, and yet they seem to love each other. I mean, that offensive team loves each other. They play together. They play to win. They're Super Bowl champions. All of that should lead to laurels on the head of Eric Bieniemy. All that should lead to a line outside his door offering him employment. And, the thing is that, I mean, the NFL is just an absolute cesspool of these kinds of hiring practices. I mentioned the Rooney Rule earlier when that was enacted, because it was considered such a scandal that there were only 3 black head coaches in the entire NFL. Today, there are 4. And 4 only if you use the term coaches of color and expand it and include Robert Saleh, who's Lebanese, and Ron Rivera, who's Latino. So it's black bodies that are the foundation of the game, quite literally. And when you see that there are no chances to ascend, it reminds me of something that former NFL player Michael Bennett said to me, where he said, the NFL, it's a myth to think of it as that this is an integrated sport, because it's still segregated between those who play and those who benefit off those who play.
Absolutely. And it's even segregated by position, right? When you look at the defense, you will see of the 11 players on a starting defense, upwards of 9 are usually black. The main integrated position group is offensive line, right? And other than that, you can tell by the position the person plays, you can profile them. So now it's time to go in or out, where I ask our panel to go in or out on some hot topics. First one comes from a fan of the show, a friend of the show, my good friend Francis at FrancisJames23 on Instagram. He hit me up in the inbox, and he asked me, so I'm asking Dave and Meghan. I'm going to start with Meghan. NFL football teams that win a game in a visiting stadium and then go celebrate on the logo, are we in or out on them doing that? Meghan, tell me.
I mean, I'm in on it. I don't. What is the issue with it? Like, see, in all honesty, I don't see an issue with it. If you win a game, celebrate how you want. I'm in on it. Like, I don't care. Like, that logo is painted on grass or turf. It doesn't mean anything.
Dave, are you in or out?
I'm in on the "I'm rubber, you're glue" corollary. If a team does it to you, then of course you can do it to them, like the Ravens did the other week to the Titans. If nobody's done it to anybody yet, you should know that you're playing with matches amidst a very dry field.
Perfect. I'm actually in on it, Dave. For similar reasons. I'm in on the. It doesn't matter to me if someone does it. I'm actually in on the fact that teams get mad over this, right? Mm-hmm. Because one of the things that folks who like to second guess and criticize and finger wag pro athletes, rich athletes, especially if they're black, is that they're all selfish and they only play for themselves. And what this tells you is that, like, a lot of these guys actually care about something bigger than themselves, even if it's just, the symbol of the team. It shows you that they actually are team players, bottom line. And so that actually resonates with me, as well as the fact that, like, listen, it is absolutely poor sportsmanship to celebrate that way. But this is not high school sports. This is not Pop Warner. By the time, if I'm a coach, these guys get to me, they're in their 20s, some of them are in their 30s. They're all making more money than I am. Like, I'm not going to teach them lessons about sportsmanship, and I'm not here to teach them lessons about sportsmanship. We're here to win. We're here to entertain. And if you come dance on the corporate logo, on the team logo before the game, and it adds to the entertainment factor, then it does. And that's what we're all here for. Perfect. So now, James Harden has finally made it to Brooklyn. And so eventually Kyrie Irving is going to make it back too. And you're going to have Kevin Durant, James Harden, Kyrie Irving, Steve Nash, and one basketball. Dave Zirin, are you in or out on all of these entities peacefully coexisting throughout a whole season?
Oh, I'm in. And as someone who was born in Brooklyn, I think I can steal this joke, because partly also because I'm not sure who said it, but in Harden, KD, and Kyrie, you really do have the 3 types of the Brooklyn man. You've got the overweight dude with the beard. You've got the tall, skinny dude. And you've got conspiracy dude who thinks the earth is flat. These are the three types of Brooklyn man. And so to see them come together on one team is actually a celebration of Brooklyn. And if you want to add the Canadian who's not quite sure what he's doing there, a very common sight in Brooklyn, then you can add Steve Nash too. So I think they're going to be just fine. They'll rotate through. It would be tonight you get 40. No, tonight you get 40. And in the playoffs, things will get serious.
Perfect. Meghan, you in or out?
I'm in on this. At the end of the day, we saw KD make adjustments and adapt when he joined the Splash Brothers. We saw Kyrie have to learn how to adapt when he joined LeBron James. So, and KD and James Harden have played together early on in their career when they were young and hungry, and both could have had the mindset that I want to be the alpha male. They've all had the ability to be the alpha male. Now they're coming together. I'm totally in on this. I think they're going to figure it out. They're at an age where if you can't figure it out, then maybe you shouldn't be a super team together. But I don't think they're going to have many issues. The only issue they might have is how long it's going to be until Kyrie returns to the uniform.
Listen, I'm out on the idea that these three huge personalities and huge egos are going to coexist productively throughout the course of a whole season and postseason. I understand that KD and Harden have played together, but they've been apart for a while. And what happens when you separate these two people is that each of them grows, and then you can't fit these personalities, fit these egos back into the same package. But I am 100,000% in on the entertainment value it's going to provide, because they're going to win a bunch of games just on talent alone, just on offensive firepower alone. And then the games are going to get tougher in the playoffs, and you're going to stress test that team. And not that I want to see them start bickering and finger pointing, but I really want to see them start bickering and finger pointing. I can't wait. And this is why, I audit the NBA until the playoffs come. I'm all the way in with my half-baked opinions for stuff like this. But Harden, Durant, and Irving are not the only disaffected people coming back together to form a team this week. It came out Sunday night that part of Joe Biden's inaugural celebration is going to include a performance from a band called The New Radicals. Meghan, you might not be old enough to remember The New Radicals. Dave, I know you remember The New Radicals. And if there is a theme to this entire program bringing in, is that you only get what you give. So my question to you guys is, if somehow elected president, and don't say it can't happen for Meghan and I just because we were born in Canada, because if Ted Cruz can run, we can run too. Meghan, if you're elected president, what band, what music act is playing at your inauguration?
Okay, so I have two. Not with us anymore would be Biggie Smalls. Shout out to Brooklyn, Dave. I gave you that one.
Thank you.
And alive, I got to go with the duo of the Carters, also known as Jay-Z and Beyonce.
Perfect.
And, honorable mention to Mary J. Blige. Why not?
Get them all out there. Listen, I don't know if they have the same agent. Get them all out there. Dave.
Oh, I mean, I would absolutely do the impossible. I mean, the Beastie Boys haven't played since the passing of MCA. God bless him. And so I would bring back Ad Rock and Mike D. And as president, I would stand in for MCA and do all his parts. And frankly, who's going to stop me? I got the nuclear football. So that would be my inauguration. It would be me cosplaying as MCA.
You could just do the hologram.
That's true.
But
you've got the power to do it.
but then I couldn't rap.
I'd like to thank Dave and Meghan for joining us, making time for us on this busy morning in a hectic week in Washington, D.C. Guys, I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I respect both of you. Stay safe.
Thank you.
And to the people tuning in, if you like us, hit the like button, leave a comment. If you hate us, hit the dislike button, leave a comment. All engagements matter. If there's a topic you'd like to see us tackle on In or Out, Meghan says you can tweet at her. My mentions are like so hermetically sealed. If I don't follow you, I'm not going to get it anyway. So I don't know, tweet at Meghan or Dave or CBC Sports. But on the real, if there's a topic you want to see us cover on In or Out, let us know and we'll see if we can get to it. Until then, stay safe. And next week we'll be back with more Bring It In.